All right. In this video, we're going to look at creating interactive data visualizations. And I'm going to walk through how we are going to accomplish that. So the first thing that we need to look at is our HTML. And for this example, I'm going to do two different interactions. Okay, one that changes the column of data that we're looking at, and one that filters the data. So if we look at our data set, I've got products, retail sales, online sales. We're not doing anything with inventory, and then we have a category. So one visualization that we're going to do just switches between retail sales and online sales. So there we're switching the column of data that we're representing. And this one, which isn't hooked up right now, we'll do it later, filters the rows. So it says only show rows with food or only show rows with vehicle in the category column. Now, if we look at our HTML, we need two things. First, we need a div with an ID, and that's where we're going to put our visualizations, just an empty div. The second thing that we need are elements that we're going to click or do something to, but probably click in order to change the graph. And this is just like we've done interaction before using jQuery. I need a way to point to these buttons, and these can be A elements, they can be images, they can be anything. So I need a way to point to them with my jQuery, and the way that I'm pointing to these is I'm going to say look for the button elements that are inside the div with class filter. And then I also need to attach some data to these buttons. So I need to say when I click on this button, what category are we looking for? Okay, and these categories are going to correspond. These are my food and vehicle ones, so those are going to correspond to what is in this category field. And down here, these are my buttons to switch my columns, and you'll see here I have data column set to the name of these columns, okay? So that's really important because we need some way for our HTML to communicate with our JavaScript, and that's how we do it, is using these data attributes. All right, so let's look at our JavaScript file. Now I've got everything collapsed, so I'm just gonna talk through the basic structure of this file, and then we'll go into more details. So let's start by doing what we've done before, which is just setting up and actually making the plot. So to make the plot, I need two arrays. I might need more than that, but I need arrays that are going to hold my data, okay? Because let's jump down to our make plot function. So this function actually generates the plot. And if we look at it, the most important thing that we have here, we have variables that hold my X values and my Y values. So here that's going to be products and sales. And then I'm going to give this trace to a variable called data, and that's an array. I could have multiple traces, obviously. I'm going to set my layout, my configuration option, and then I call my new plot function. Okay, so I tell it the ID of the div that's going to get the chart inserted into it. I give it data, layout, configuration. That generates my plot. Okay, so what's left is we have to fill these empty arrays, product and sales. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to have this function called process data. And this function reads a CSV, and then eventually it's going to fill these arrays. It's going to make a list of products and a list of sales. So I give it the URL for my CSV file. And then this is what I'm going to do with the data that I get back. So the first thing that I'm going to do to it, and this is new, I'm going to save that data in a variable. Okay. And because we're going to be generating this plot over and over again, I don't want to go get my data from my CSV file every time. I'm just going to store it in this variable. So just know now that sales data is equal to my CSV file data. And then I'm going to call this for each, okay? And I'm going to call for each row in my data, I'm going to call the function add to arrays. And after I've done that, I'm going to make my plot. We look at this. Okay, so again, what we're doing is we're reading our CSV file, we're saving the data, and then for each row in the data, we're calling this function add to arrays. And after we've done that, we're going to make our plot. So let's look at our add to arrays function. All right, add to arrays. So this is where we take each row of data and we add the information that we need to our X and Y lists. Okay, so for my X list, I want to add apple, chicken, van, tractor, and to my Y list, I'm going to add one of these depending on what we're visualizing at the time. So products is my list of products, or the list of things that are going to go on my X axis, and push just means add to that array. So add to that array the first row's product. When this runs again, it'll add the second row's product, the third row's product, the fourth row's. And now, because our default is to show retail sales, I'm also going to take this sales array and I'm going to add the column retail sales. Okay. So it's going to go through, it's going to add apple to products, 200 to retail sales, chicken to products, 30 to retail sales, on until I get my two arrays. From this point on, if you remember in process data, so we've added two arrays and now we call make plot. And make plot is just going to take that products array that we just talked about and that sales array that we just talked about, and it's going to generate my graph. All right. So far, so good. And what we do is we set up all of these functions, and then at the very end of our script, we call process data. So if we stopped there, we would just generate our chart. But we also need to set up the interaction. So at the very top, we're going to have our code to set up my button clicks. So this says, look for a thing with class filter, go inside it and find all the buttons, watch for a click event on those buttons, and then do this function. Okay. Now inside this function, the first thing we're going to do is reset our two arrays. Okay. So I want to empty out my list of products, empty out my list of sales, because we might change those things. That's the whole point, is we're going to change those. And if we scroll down to the bottom of this function, you'll see that all we're doing here is we're building a new trace. Okay, this looks exactly like the traces in my make plot function below. Okay, it's collecting product sales, and we're going to just change these. Okay, I'm going to set up a new data variable. This is just like below. I'm just calling it temp data so that I can kind of keep track of it in my mind. I'm going to build a object that configures my animation. And this is the most basic thing I can do. I'm just going to set the transition equal to ½ second. And then instead of calling plotly draw plot, I'm going to call plotly animate. And this works almost exactly the same. I tell it the ID, I give it my data, and I give it my animation config, and that will now animate every time I click this button. So the most important thing here is obviously we have to have some logic to change what goes into products and what goes into sales. And the first example we're going to do is the one that's loaded right now, where I click retail and online and I switch which column of data I'm selecting. So if you think about it, our default example, we just said get the retail sales, add it to sales. This time I need to say, okay, what button did they click on? What column do they want? And then get that column. And this is actually very simple. So let's walk through it. So here's my example for switching columns. And the first thing I'm going to do is get the column that the user wants. Because remember, in our data, or in our HTML, I have on these buttons a data column attribute, and that is set to the name of the column that I want. So retail sales matches retail sales, online sales matches online sales. Okay, so in my JavaScript, when I click on this button, I set a variable that's equal to this, and here this is the button I clicked, and then .data gets the data attribute column. Okay, so if we console logged column right here, it would give me the name of the column that I want. And then I'm just going to go through my sales data, each row, and for this one, I want every row included. So for the first row, I want to add Apple to products, and then I either want to add retail sales or online sales to sales. And the way that I can do that is just sales.push row, and then I'm going to give it this column variable. And if we look down at our other function right here, when we hard-coded it, when we hand-coded it, this string right here is equivalent to this variable column here. This is going to get a string with the name of the column. So I don't have to do any conditionals here. I don't have to do an if statement or anything like that. I can just say sales push row and then whatever column they chose. And that gives me this. Okay. that's an easy example. Let's do the other example, which is also really easy. Okay, so I've commented that out, and I'm going to uncomment my filter example. Okay, so in my other example, what I want to do is I want to show some rows and not others, and I want to show and not show them based on this category column. And if we look at our HTML again, this is these buttons right here, and you'll see they have data category, and that is equal to exactly what is in this column, food or vehicles. So we're going to have a very similar process here. And the first thing I'm going to do is set a category variable that's equal to this. Remember, this is the button and then the data category attribute. Now, when I loop through, so I say for the first row, do this, for the second row, do this, for the third row, do this. I'm going to check is the category column of that row equal to whatever this string is. So let's pretend that we clicked on food. I'm going to say, okay, for the first row, is the category column equal to food? Okay, it is, so that's going to be true. Okay, if so, add that product name to my list of products, and then add the retail sales to sales. We're just doing retail sales here. Okay, then I'm going to do my second row, and I'm going to say, is it food? Yes. Okay, add it. Then I'm going to do my third row. I'm going to say, is it food? It's vehicles. So it's just not going to add to those arrays. And that is going to give us something that works like this. Okay, and either of these examples can be used with any kind of chart that you're building. So you could take away points from a map by using this filter example. Various ideas like that. Okay, so when you're working on this, go step by step. Start by setting up your HTML and thinking about what information you're going to need to pass into your JavaScript. Okay, and then I would start by doing your make plot function and your process data function first. Okay. And your add to arrays, because these three functions right here will generate your first graph, right? That'll generate just the graph without any interaction. And then remember that all you're doing is you're setting up your button click, you're resetting everything, and then basically you're just writing another one of these add to array functions. Okay, you're doing something similar to this, but you're changing what you're pushing onto these arrays. Okay, that's it.